Let's start with what might be the most powerful force that can override individual moral judgment: authority. When Milgram designed his experiments in the early 1960s, he wanted to understand how ordinary Germans could participate in Nazi atrocities. What he discovered about authority's influence shocked the world and continues to challenge our understanding of human behavior today. Authority's deadly whisper, the Milgram revelation. How far would you go if someone in a lab coat simply asked you to continue? Would you inflict pain on an innocent person? Would you ignore their screams? Most of us immediately answer, no. We believe we would stand up, walk out, refuse to participate. But the evidence tells a different story about human nature, one that might be hard to accept about yourself. In 1961, a Yale psychologist named Stanley Milgram designed an experiment that would forever change our understanding of human behavior. The setup was simple but ingenious. Volunteers were told they were participating in a study about memory and learning. They were assigned the role of teacher and introduced to another participant, the learner, who was actually an actor working with Milgram. The teacher watched as the learner was strapped into a chair in an adjacent room, with electrodes attached to his wrist. The teacher's job seemed straightforward. Read a list of word pairs for the learner to memorize, test the learner's memory, and administer an electric shock whenever the learner made a mistake. The shock generator had 30 switches, labeled from 15 volts, slight shock, all the way up to 450 volts, XXX danger, severe shock. The teacher was instructed to increase the voltage with each wrong answer. As the experiment progressed, the learner deliberately gave incorrect answers. At 120 volts, he shouted about pain. By 150 volts, he demanded release. His screams intensified at higher voltages until eventually, after 330 volts, he fell completely silent, suggesting something terrible had happened. Whenever a teacher hesitated, the experimenter, a man in a grey lab coat, responded with increasingly firm prompts. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, you have no other choice, you must go on. Before conducting this experiment, Milgram asked psychiatrists and others to predict the results. Most estimated only 1 to 2% would comply fully, only those with sadistic tendencies. Milgram himself expected most participants would refuse once the learner expressed pain. The actual results stunned everyone. 65% of participants continued to administer shocks, all the way to the maximum 450 volts. This statistic forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Ordinary people, people like you and me, can commit harmful acts under the right circumstances. This isn't about a few bad apples. It's about fundamental human psychology. The participants' physical distress revealed their internal conflict. Many sweated profusely, bit their lips until they bled, or dug fingernails into their palms. They trembled, stuttered, and laughed nervously. One man developed a full-body tremor. Many pleaded with the experimenter to let them stop, yet continued when told they must go on. They knew they were causing pain. They wanted to stop, but they didn't. One participant protested. I think something's happening to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He might be dead. I don't know. I don't get no answer. The experimenter responded, please continue. And the man complied, delivering the next shock while visibly shaking. What happened in that laboratory? How did an authority figure, with no actual power over the participants, override their personal moral codes so completely? The answer reveals something profound about human psychology. When we enter situations with clear authority structures, many of us undergo what Milgram called an agentic shift. We transition from seeing ourselves as autonomous moral agents to viewing ourselves as instruments of someone else's will. Our normal moral questions, is this right? Or, am I causing harm? Get replaced by a different question. Am I following the rules properly? This agentic shift creates psychological distance between our actions and their consequences. We feel less responsible because we're following orders, or doing my job. The experimenter repeatedly emphasized that responsibility rested with him, not the participant. This absolution was enough for many to continue actions they recognized as harmful. You can see this shift in everyday situations. When an employee implements a policy they disagree with, when a healthcare worker follows a procedure they know feels dehumanizing, or when you find yourself complying with a request that makes you uncomfortable simply because it came from your boss or an authority figure. In 2009, researcher Jerry Berger partially replicated Milgram's experiment with additional safeguards. Despite decades of ethics teaching and the experiment's fame, Berger still found about 70% of participants willing to continue to 150 volts, the highest level permitted for ethical reasons. Participants' reflections reveal the powerful psychological mechanisms at work. One wrote, "I believe the experiment was designed to help scientists improve the learning process. I trusted the experimenter." Another said, "If the man says to continue, well, he's the boss." Perhaps most revealing was this comment. "I was surprised to find myself doing what I was doing. I'm not that kind of person really, but somehow, I found I was." This captures the central revelation of Milgram's work. The gap between who we believe ourselves to be and how we actually behave under authority pressure. Authority's power doesn't come primarily from fear of punishment. The participants could have left without consequence. Rather, it comes from our socialization to respect credentials, defer to expertise, maintain politeness, avoid disruption, and fulfill social obligations. These prosocial tendencies make civilization possible, but they also make us vulnerable to manipulation. We don't consciously decide to abandon our moral agency. We slip into a different psychological mode where obedience becomes the primary virtue rather than independent moral judgment. What makes this finding even more troubling is that authority rarely operates in isolation. In real-world situations, authority combines with group pressure and role expectations. When facing both an authority figure and peers who comply, our resistance weakens further.